It's October the 8th. It's 2024. I smurfed up as everybody knows is normal. October the 8th, 2024. At least I got that part right tonight. That's pretty good. I'm quite proud of myself to get that much right. You can call into these live shows tonight. I'm Dana at 709-589-4406. We got Hurricane Milton coming in with around 250 miles per hour gust and at least 180 mile per hour winds. And how many kilometers is 250 miles per hour? I mean, that is incredible numbers. Anybody want to look that up for me? Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Does anybody know why journalists hate us so much? Anybody figured that out yet? Should journalists and academics who lied about the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, for instance, and I mean lied, devastating lies, lose their degrees? Clearly, they should go to jail for the rest of their lives. And there should be documentaries about how evil those journalists actually was. What if the 152 billion that they used to clean up Fukushima was spent on geothermal instead? And I've used these numbers before, 4.5 million per megawatt for geothermal, because you can have it up and running in 1 year instead of 15 or 20. One estimate was 33 gigawatts of geothermal, 33 nuclear reactors. So Japan could have replaced all their energy with geothermal. And they're saying, they said you can't because the geothermal springs, the hot springs, are owned by families or something. Well, they can drill down anywhere else and hit the same temperatures. They don't have to take over the hot springs to make it work. And they got a billion excuses. And so the big concern, of course, is Hurricane Milton is coming in, and there's multiple nuclear power plants and nuclear dumps right in the middle of the path. And when we're talking about winds exceeding, bear with me here, we're talking about winds at 250 miles per hour. I just want to see what that is in kilometers, because unfortunately I'm in Canada. Miles per hour to kilometers. I'll put it up on the screen for you in a second here. Here we go. I'll get up on the screen. It's 400 kilometers per hour. Like, personally, I can't even wrap my mind around 100 kilometers an hour is the speed limit on the highways here. 400 kilometer per hour wind gust. First off, 250 mile per hour. How many people driven their cars at 250 miles per hour? If you put your arm out the window, it's going to break your arm. Let's put it that way. If it picks up a 2x4, it's going to turn it into a projectile that will go right through your house at 250 miles per hour. The wind gusts actually at 180 miles per hour will probably be closer to 300 miles per hour. And I'm worried sick about all the victims that are in the way, and the animals and the pets that'll get left behind, and the animals that can't hide away. I've never experienced anything like this. And they say it's a once in a lifetime. And it's coming in on the back of Hurricane Helen, which dumped 40 trillion gallons of water. And you take 240 gallons per ton, put it in a 1 ton bag, they're 6 feet by 6 feet, and stack them up. That's over 400 trips to the moon and back in 1 ton bags of water. The equivalent of. So these numbers are not something we're used to. So we had that one. Now we're going to have another one coming in really close to the same place. And the winds we're talking about, the storm surge we're talking about, and we got nuclear sites right in the middle of the way. And the nuclear industry is so stupid they might not even shut it down. So if you're in the middle, if you're in the path of that, you need to take this serious. You are not going to sit this puppy out. You're talking about winds gusting over 400 kilometers per hour. There's no infrastructure that is built that can sustain winds over 250 miles per hour. And so, and then we're talking about storm surge, and this is unprecedented. They've never seen these numbers, allegedly. And so they don't have a precedence to compare it to. So we need to, if you know anybody that's, I know Uber is going to give people free rides to shelters. At least it's better than staying in the nuclear meltdown zones. Because if you have a nuclear meltdown with these things, and if you look at what they done at Fukushima, they covered that up. And because they got away with it, there's zero possibility they won't do it again. It's zero possibility they won't cover it up again. And look at the building to your left. They actually covered that up and pretended it never happened. Let's go to the big screen, because in case you're using a tablet or a cell phone, a lot of people do. This might help you see it a bit better. Fukushima's latest race to plug the radiation leak, the 4th of April 2011. The race to plug the leak. Is Reactor 2 the source of the worst leak? Calling it a leak is absurd, by the way. Well, that's Reactor 2, but what about Reactor 3? Reactor 3 actually detonated. It ejected the reactor core right into the building. And the plume covered the entire planet. That was the source of the worst. Everything about nuclear is bad. Like the nuclear emissions, the radioactive fallout, is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. It's such a tiny amount you cannot perceive it. You simply cannot perceive the amount we're talking about. Top priority at the damaged Fukushima Dai-1 nuclear power plants is locate the source of radiation now pouring into the environment. Well, you don't suppose it's Reactor 3 or Reactor 4. Suggesting that it's Reactor 2. And we've covered lots. This is a legacy headlines. Now, all these headlines we're going to cover, I have never covered before on this site. They're incredible stories. And very important. And I have so much that I can't get to unless I just go ahead and do it. I just got to just walk forward, swing in, and try to get through it. So the 4th of April, suggesting that Reactor 2 to your right is worse than the one to your left, which is right alongside of it, and that Andy, the monster, Coghlan, who we've covered quite a few times, you know, these people should lose their degree, shouldn't they? I mean, Fukushima makes Chernobyl look like it didn't exist. It's so bad. And Chernobyl was brutal. My goodness, it's still causing hideous amount of harm today. And at work, to plug it could take months. You can't plug a nuclear meltdown. And the journalist that wrote this knew that. There's no illusions about it. On the 1st of April, TEPCO admitted, now the accident happened March 11th. March 11th to April 1st is less than 3 weeks, right? It's 21 days. So 3 weeks. And that those pictures were well known by that day. There's no way he didn't know reactors were gone, the fuel pools were gone. And then mainly, worried about the contamination was mainly as a result of iodine-131. This was the original stories we heard from all the medias. It's frightening that any academic or any journalist... Now, he didn't write the article. He put his name on it and pretended he wrote it. It was written by the International Atomic Energy Agencies and nuclear energy institutes and the public relation firms that work for them. And the reason they're doing it is because you poisoned the entire planet and every species on it and every human. And just because you can't smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or perceive it, that don't mean that you're going to be immune to it. You're not going to turn into Hulk. You're not turning into the Spider-Man. These are fiction created by the nuclear industry to make you complacent about nuclear dumps, nuclear waste. At a monitoring point in the sea, 330 meters south of the main water outlet from the plant, a tsunami ran through this whole coast, let alone the site. Levels of iodine-131 were 3,300 times the limit. And levels 1,263 times the limit were recorded 30 minutes to the north. Again, the plume that is emitted from this is, you're talking about billions. Billions and billions of times. The rainfall in Canada was 20 million atoms per liter of just iodine-131. And we know that there would have been 10 times more iodine-132, 30 times more iodine-33, 31 times more iodine-129, which was actually backed up by another study at Ottawa, Canada, of 220 million atoms of iodine-129 per liter, sustained for months and months and months. It's truly absurd. What is the evidence that Reactor 2 is the source? It is the only one of the 6 reactors at the site with suspected damage to the reactor core, the New York Times reported. That the U.S. Energy Secretary Stephen Chow has said about 70% of the core of one reactor thought to be Reactor 2 had been damaged and another reactor had suffered a 33% meltdown. I mean, these are just, oh my goodness, types. It's just, I understand, right, that this industry has been evil since its very inception, right? So, a worker at Reactor 3 in 2011 said, not at Reactor 3, there is nobody working at number 3, said nuclear fuel is gone from the spent fuel pool and that they sent drones and helicopters and other countries did over the site. They knew that was gone. When you seen this explosion, there wasn't a nuclear academic on the planet that didn't know Reactor 3 was gone. At Reactor 1 and 3, there have been explosions of hydrogen. The hydrogen is the nuclear meltdown. That's what caused the hydrogen to exist. So the explosions was enough to blow the roof off the outer containment building. This is the story right from the very inception that they put out. There are no intentions of ever telling the truth. Last year, they moved the goalpost and said there is no meltdowns, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. The reactor pressure vessel containing nuclear core appeared to have stood firm. No, it didn't stand firm. It was ejected along with the fuel pool right out of the buildings. And Reactor 2, despite appearing the least damage from the outside, may have not been so lucky. 4 days after the last month's earthquake tsunami, an explosion was heard somewhere in the inner containment which houses the reactor pressure vessels. So by day, because this happened on March 11, 2011, by March the 16th, all the reactors had detonated multiple times. And reactor 3, of course, when it detonated, because it was a plutonium, they cook off at around 200,000 degrees hotter than a typical disaster meltdown. Radiation levels are too high for inspections. And the damage is thought to have been a donut-shaped tank directly beneath the reactor vessel. The damage is thought to be the torus. Again, how can we sit in silence and pretend that this is acceptable? How come the world's not rallying to hold these academics and journalists accountable? These are vile, disgusting murderers. That's the best way to describe them. These are just serial killers on a whole different level we've never perceived before. Suggesting the suppression tank recycles, regulates steam generated by the heat from the reactors used to drive the electrical generators, may have damaged the reactor pressure vessel, perhaps putting a holing it. I never even heard that expression. Leading to a partial meltdown and the leak of fuel. Partial meltdown. To me, it's particularly offensive whenever I hear these particular narratives. Today, TEPCO's engineers, what is being done to identify the leak and plug it? You like this one? Today, TEPCO engineers unsuccessfully attempted to show the radioactive water reaching the sea came from a flooded trench beneath Reactor 2. And they poured 13 kilograms of white powder into the trench. You can't get that close to the building. 3 weeks later, these buildings had ejected the reactor cores out of the buildings. Nobody's wandering around pouring 26 pounds of white powder. It's the strangest statement imaginable. Because you would use dye so you can actually spot it. Expecting it to emerge at the outlet into the sea, but it didn't, suggesting the water from the trench is finding its way into the sea by a different route, possibly via groundwater. I'll give them credit. When they tell a lie, they go all the way, don't they? Well, it's beyond a story about a diaper. Yesterday, workers attempted to plug the trench by pumping in a polymer that soaks up 50 times its own volumes of water and so serves as a molecular diaper. The idea was that the polymer would absorb the radioactive water and would then be recovered and disposed of safely. That didn't work either. Like, it's almost as if whoever wrote the story is insane, but clearly you couldn't write the story unless you know a lot about nuclear. You really got to know nuclear to come up with a lie that crazy. So how are you going to pour in a couple of kilograms and plug that building up? These were 190 foot. They're 150 feet wide, 50 meters wide. Think of a 15-story building on its side. How are you going to plug up something when the building... I mean, look at it over there. When you look at the four sides of the buildings, this industry... And just let me try to... So, like the International Commission on Radiation Protection, the ICRP, the UNSCLEAR, United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, IRPA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the National Council on Radiation Protection. These are just the worst of the worst that humans ever created. They get together. They're all basically the same organization. They're all paid by the same United Nations. They get together, they cook up a story, and then they come out and assault you from 1,000 different directions in your medias, in your schools, your universities. You can't have any kind of life on this planet with these people holding positions of authority. You simply can't. We are in so much trouble, and we should be reacting appropriately. And the only thing holding us back is these organizations have scuttled humanity's future. TEPCO hopes to erect curtain-like barriers of silt around the water outlets to pin into contaminated water. Well, then you would have liquefaction. You would also have the water coming to lethal by the liter. just from the gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the alphas. So if you did plug up a so-called hole, the water rises up and anybody who walks past it dies instantly. So you wouldn't do it. You can't do that. They don't care about the ocean. They couldn't care less. The tanks were built to manipulate you and to make you complacent. It's very successful at it too. We would like to set up these barriers as soon as possible, but it could take several days to complete the work. A spokesman for the government's Nuclear Industrial Safety Agency. Like, you are doing nothing close to these buildings. Like, you are doing nothing. If there's water there, you are running away. Because it's lethal just to walk past it. You are doing nothing. And 2 years later, you're still doing nothing because there's lethal doses everywhere. What other evidence is there? The Unit 2 is the source. The cable trench that contains much more radiation than those in the other 3 damaged reactor units. So they're saying the cable trench contained more radiation than the 3 nuclear meltdowns. And all 4 of the trenches are full to the brim with contaminated water and threatens to overflow, potentially emptying into the sea about 50 meters away. So they're saying that the trench is more radioactive than these nuclear meltdowns, for instance. And each building had around 8 reactor cores, massive reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings in 2 fuel pools. I mean, the level of evil and the level of contempt for humanity and the level of just criminality, this is so criminal. It's not illegal to poison you with radiation, murder you with radiation, otherwise they couldn't do it in the hospital, for starters. And Congress and parliaments, like in Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia, and Congress in the United States, don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation. And if they did, they still wouldn't do it. Because if they'd done it, you couldn't have a nuclear power plant because they're hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day. And it is poison. Suggests that the cable trench contains much more radiation than those in the other 3 damaged reactor units. No one knows yet whether the tsunami filled up the trenches or whether they've been flooded by large volumes of water were sprayed onto the core to prevent them from overheating. All they had was out of the 3 fire trucks on site, 2 was destroyed. Only 1 existed. The reactors typically needed 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. The fire hoses doesn't come close to that in a day. The trench in Reactor 2 is the most contaminated with 1,000 millisieverts of radiation per hour. It was actually 1 billion microsieverts outside of Reactor 1. Or 1 trillion, whatever it was. It was it was 1 million sieverts. 1,000 microsieverts is a sievert. So it was 1 billion. Or 1 trillion, rather. Millisieverts. 3,000 millisieverts will kill you because you're talking about shine, you're talking about gamma shines, X-rays, neutrons. But we're talking about actual ejecting reactor cores and fuel pools, reactor cores all over the site. There's no good getting up for me to get upset about it because every story is like this. Every story from the nuclear industry is just like this. It's just every sentence, every paragraph is full of propaganda, but every sentence is typically a lie. And you have to challenge every one of these lies just to prove to the world that, you better get your act together. And now you got Hurricane Milton coming in. It's still picking up speed, so when it comes to shore, it might be 200, 220, 225 miles per hour. It's going to be gusting over 300 miles per hour. It's going to be gusting over 500 kilometers per hour. A once-in-a-lifetime storm, he said. Well, you got the elections coming up, right? So this is going to be an incredible distraction of the moron Harris is. No one's even run the country. Joe Biden can't even tie his own shoes. Right, and the other option is it's just it's meant to divide everybody permanently, I would imagine. Radiation in the trench of Unit 1, on the other hand, amounts to just over 0.4 millisieverts, not even a millisievert per hour. So to write a lie like that about a nuclear meltdown is about as evil as you can possibly be. You have crossed Rubicon of evil. You're a super villain. So how would water contaminated by the core have reached the trench? So suggesting that there's no meltdown is what they're doing. I can barely wrap. When I was reading the story last week, or the end of the week before, rather. So this is hindsight. This is 2013. Reactor 3 and Reactor 4. So there's zero possibility that any nuclear engineer didn't know this was the result. Explosion in the suppression tank, of course they're going back to the suppression tank, which is in the basement, could have blasted a hole through to the neighboring turbine hall. We've heard this narrative before. High levels of radiation registered in turbine halls have credibility to this scenario. From there it could have leaked through to the trench and flooded the... So your distraction is, don't worry about the meltdown, worry about the trench far away. Like the level of scumbaggery. I don't even know how you can compare something. Let's try and charge up my phone here. As long as I don't squeeze the bottom right-hand part of my phone, it works. But I got a big thick case on it now that I know how to get around it, right? But I mean, it's a nightmare. These are nuclear meltdowns. At the top of the buildings, Chernobyl was a brand new reactor. It was about 2 years old. It was graphite. Very nasty stuff, but nowhere near the toxicity of these reactors. These were huge reactors. Each of them were massive pure plutonium, pure uranium. And at the top of each of the buildings, unlike Chernobyl, there was fuel pools. And in the fuel pools was around 8 reactor cores in both fuel pools total. Why not pump water from the trench before it overflows and store it somewhere? Well, if you did do that, whoever went and put the pump in the trench died right on the spot. And anybody that walked over the hose even 1,000 feet away, there was say the hose was 1,000 feet away, they walked over it, they dropped dead right away. TEPCO is proposing to do that. It has said today it plans to pump 11,500 tons of contaminated water and from the trenches, turbine halls, and dump it in the ocean, starting although it contains radioactivity at 100 times the legal limit. These are absurd to suggest that it's simply just 100 times legal limit. And this arrogance, this incredible arrogance to come out with a story like that shouldn't go unchallenged. It's criminal not to challenge this. These should be dragged into court. There should be hundreds and hundreds of lawyers out there would jump on these people and sue them. Take away their degrees. Make sure they serve the rest of their lives in jail because they stopped you from coming up with solutions. In a press release, TEPCO announced it plans to dump 10,000 tons of water contaminated with low levels of radiation. There is no low levels of radiation at that site. There is no low levels anywhere within 100 miles or 200 miles of that site. The numbers in Tokyo meant you should have abandoned Tokyo permanently. Evil and wicked does not come close to describing the evilness. There is nothing more eviler than these people. What they have done, and they have disarmed the entire planet from coming up with solutions. Unequivocally, these people need to be held accountable. Not should be held accountable, but needs to be held accountable. It's a crime not to hold these people accountable. And the original authors of this story were clearly the nuclear industry. Andy couldn't have wrote this article. It's patently absurd to suggest that he was capable of writing the article. He put his name on it. And the new scientists, the most despicable people, it's unimaginable the stuff that they had done and said. TEPCO is building a 6,000-ton water tank into which contaminated water will be sent for treatment in an ion exchange unit that will decontaminate the water by scavenging the radioactive ions and replacing them with harmless ones. Effectively, they are having to manage this contaminated water and treat it. It simply doesn't work that way. And this was Andrew Sherry of the Dalton Nuclear Institute in Manchester, UK. And anybody from the United Kingdom in the nuclear industry, these are real-life monsters. They're really sadistic monsters. They've destroyed everything and everybody's future. And these types of lies are so easy to challenge in the courtroom. We live in an unbelievable, idiotic, nightmarish world because of the nuclear industry. Does the contamination of seawater pose a health threat? So far, most of the radioactivity comes from 131 with a half-life of 8 days. So when they talk about a half-life of 8 days, and they only acknowledge iodine 131 as the original one, you are dealing with the worst humans in history. They make Pol Pot look like a little schoolboy. So within a month or so, the level of iodines entering the sea will have fallen by a factor of 16. I mean, my goodness, these are nuclear meltdowns, and that's the gibberish that they're going to be putting out there? That nothing else exists on the iodine 131? Some researchers contacted by the new scientists believe that more serious, long-lasting problem may have caused a plume of airborne that blew northwest in the early days of the crisis. The plume deposited radiation across the Fukushima prefecture with the worst contamination seen in the village of Lydia, where they moved people back into a few years later. Because the fallout included cesium, which is the British pronunciation of cesium. It'll take 30 years to decay to half the original amount. And farmers in hot spots may not be able to grow or sell their products for many years. In hot spots. So in other words, farmers a couple of streets over can grow it, but if they're in a hot spot, they couldn't grow it. Like literally, how, oh my goodness, how did we ever get to this? How did we ever get to the point where the truth is feared and scorned? This is what happened to parts of Western Europe after Chernobyl accident in Ukraine, 1986. Milk from Fukushima found with radiation, power lines plugged into the nuclear plant. Joe Weisenthal. This is March the 19th. This is 7-8 days after the tsunami and just a couple of days after the last reactor detonated. And they're saying power lines are plugged into the nuclear plant. So where exactly did they plug it in? Because that's the nuclear plant they're talking about. Where do you think they plugged the power lines into them? And shouldn't these they call themselves journalists, I guess, and apparently that's not a crime. How is that not a crime, though? Should journalists and academics who lied about Fukushima nuclear meltdowns lose their degrees? Somebody accidentally said no? Why would somebody say no? I mean, these lies are catastrophic lies, right? Milk from radiation found from Fukushima, found milk from the United States, milk from Hawaii, milk from Canada was found with an insidious amounts of radiation. Milk and spinach with higher than normal radiation levels. The legal limit in Japan pre-Fukushima for rice was 0.1 atom per kilogram. So you needed 10 kilograms to get a single atom, like a single isotope. Then they raised the limits to 500 atoms per kilogram. The radiation level is not high enough to pose a risk to people, says the media. Of course, this is insanity. And this is the 19th. When people are just abandoning that part of the country and the country. There wasn't a plane leaving Japan for weeks that wasn't stuffed to capacity. Power cables connected to Reactor 1 and 2. Engineers will try to restart the pumps at these reactors on Sunday morning. There's zero possibility that anybody was getting close to Reactor 1 and 2 on the 19th. My goodness. It's pretty devastating every time I see these headlines. You're left with the impression that evil is the only thing that is allowed when it comes to nuclear. If you're exceptionally evil, then you're good. Yeah, let me see here. Like, the harm from this stuff was nasty. 6 in 10 Fukushima with diabetes. 6 in 10 Fukushima children tested have diabetes. And the head of Tokyo area medical clinic says we're expecting diabetes. The reason they get diabetes is because the journalist didn't warn them, didn't tell them to get out of harm's way. They didn't write the articles either. They just put their name on it. And then it was published as if they wrote it. Because you really got to know the nuclear industry to write the articles that they done. There's 865,000 cancers in the first year. Because the journalists cut everybody's throat. And cancer is just one of the many illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries that'll manifest. There's not just cancer. There are a lot of cancer. 865,000 cancers. There was, for children, it used to be 1 in a million. And in after the first year was 35.8%, which when you scale it up, that's 358,000 out of a million. So you went from 1 in a million with thyroid tumors, children, which means you're talking about radioactive hormones being produced perpetually. And when you're talking about that these numbers, you're talking about radioactive stem cells, obviously, too, because their skeleton is going to be incredibly radioactive. A little bit of dry whistle there. In last night's video, hang on a second. Last night's videos only got 150 views. It was a really good show. And it educates you in a whole different way with academic studies. I don't want to say it because I don't want to sound pompous, but that was a brilliant show because it really educates you on the nuances and what they actually do study. So if the adult's thyroid glands are 3 by 5 centimeters, a child is only 1 by 2 centimeters or so. So a 2 centimeter tumor on a thyroid gland that's only 2 centimeters is the full gland. And the gland produces hormones that regulates every function in the body. And, of course, children are developing. But now you got to think about, it's 13,646 out of 38,000. These are absurd numbers when it used to be 1 in a million. These are absurd numbers. So what's it going to be like for the birds and the insects and the animals and everything else? So the whole combination is mind-boggling that this industry has that much contempt for you that they done that. It's mind-boggling. It really is. It's almost as mind-boggling as the fact that I have 16 viewers. 40 minutes into my show that I've been doing for over a decade. All I'm doing is covering the news cycle. It's interesting news. This is very interesting news. This is not news that divides you. It's news that makes you capable of making informed decisions. You're able to extrapolate other news about nuclear on your own accurately and appropriately. According to writers, electricity can now be supplied to the plant. But how are you going to supply, in goodness sakes, how are you going to supply electricity to that? Reactor 3 and 4. You can't get near it anyway, but there's nothing there to plug in. When do we draw a line that says no more? The first radioactive particles have been found in the United States. Update. The plume that came in the United States the numbers around the site was 200 billion becquerels in Tokyo, rather, in actual Tokyo. The radioactive particles in the United States is the same as everywhere else on the planet. This was a French model over there based on 16 days of radioactive fallout. It doesn't include all these isotopes for some reason. And it's the cesium-137 plume covering the entire planet in 16 days at 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. That's a lot, right? Cesium-137, that's an awful lot. And it's a nasty isotope that pulses energy 600 feet every second. But the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods would have been the curium isotopes, which are infinitely worse than plutonium. And all the studies on animals, the animals died when exposed to plutonium isotopes. Now, this is the 19th of March. This is 7 days after the tsunami. It had been an extremely quiet morning, the New York Times report on an increased exodus of foreigners in Japan. Airlines say flights out are booking up fast. Khan said all information being made public. At the end, he said again that the situation is grave, but soon it'll be under control. So to cover up, across the board, all the media, all the universities, all the pundits took great pride in hoodwinking you and leaving you to get sick, incredibly sick, and your loved ones, and destroying every species on the planet by not giving it the prominence it deserved. So there was no way we can come up with solutions. Their solution was cover it up and be damned. To hell with you. They literally were spitting in your face every day for the last 13 years. Good news, radiation levels in Tokyo are still negligible, says the Dow Jones. I mean, of course, when I went there, the site can't be reached. But one of the numbers came out was 200 billion atoms per kilogram in fuel rod material near Tokyo, and that the material spread globally and composed a major part of the worst Fukushima plume, persisted for a long time in living organism, and never goes away. and must reconsider the disaster's health effects. And there was actual academics that were trying to warn you originally. 5:12 a.m. Eastern Time. Another flash from the Japan Nuclear Agency. Cables bring electricity to Reactor 1 and 2 are expected to be connected by Saturday. Reactor 1 started melting down about 50 minutes after the tsunami. La 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 la. Let's just challenge Reactor 1 and 2 for a minute. There we go. So Reactor 1, worst case scenario unfolds in 2 hours if nothing is done. 1.45 hours later, all fuel rods exposed at reactor number 2. So if they're exposed, then they melt it down right away. The zirconium cladding catches fire. It burns at 1800 degrees. It ignites the fuel, the uranium plutonium pellets. They burn at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. These numbers will boil off all the water in moments. And then everything else, because it's exposed to the air, will flash and catch fire, because that's what zirconium does when it's exposed to the air. It flashes and catches fire. Fukushima tapes, this is a suicide corpse. We can't vent Reactor 2. This is the end. Leaked TEPCO report, 120 billion atoms of plutonium, 7.6 billion becquerels of neptunium released in the first 100 hours. Media concealed the risk to the public. The numbers are infinitely worse than that. So they're suggesting a couple of grams was released. You're talking about £6 million per building, for goodness sakes. International Atomic Energy Agency informed in March that number 1 reactor core started melting about 50 minutes after the cooling stopped. So how are you going to connect cables to reactor 1 and 2 when they don't even exist? It's impossible that the bulk of the melted fuel in unit 1 is containment. It was an explosive event. 225 sieverts per hour of reactor 1. Reactor 3 ejected the fuel pools right into the buildings. So to suggest that somehow magically they were able to connect power to these buildings on day 7. On day 7. No one was there on day 7. These are nuclear meltdowns. There's nothing you can do. The doses are too high to survive. According to Kyoto, the reactors 1, 2, 3 are now level 5 accidents, the same level as 3 Mile Island. This, like, the buildings had detonated. And anybody looked at the picture of it knew the fuel pools were gone, the reactor cores were gone. And anybody that was educated knew where to find the information. Unlike us, right? So this was reactor 3. This was on day 4. When he seen that, they know the fuel pool reactor cores, because the video, we can play the video if you like. The plume covered the planet, and that model there is in 26 days. But this picture was flashed continuously around the world starting on day 6. And so everybody knew if just one of these buildings done that, detonated, it meant you could never get near the other buildings. Because they're all together, right? And so for the journalists, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the rest of all the universities came out and betrayed us, there has to be an incentive not to do that again to us. 4:32 a.m. Eastern Time. Interestingly, according to the Associated Press, which is CIA, FBI, basically, Japan is considering the Chernobyl solution, burying the entire plant in some kind of slurry of cement and sand. So how can you connect the power to it on the same, and then the next day say it's got to be buried in slurry of cement? So like they just regurgitated every lie imaginable. When you went there to look for the information, this is what you find. None of it. And Japan's cabinet minister, Yukio Idano, says it's almost certain that the water drops have hit their target. Again, this guy, he never slept. He years later, he acknowledged that he never slept for 72 hours. And he'd done around 300 interviews with TV and media. And all of them said there was no meltdown, there was no releases. No meltdown, no releases. There's talks that the generator is up and running in at least 2 of the reactors, and also some hopeful talk about the helicopter drops. And so what this story from March the 19th was doing, it was giving us an hour-by-hour play, right? They were aggregating the media from the different apologists and then feeding that out to the people that were stupid enough to come to their site. The latest, Obama just gave a reassuring but mostly insignificant statement on the nuclear crisis. He reaffirmed that only a 50-mile radius of Fukushima is at risk. This is day 7. Day 7, the plumes already hit America many times over. And every model that we know of had that particular attribute. Obama speaks on the Nuclear Crisis Business Insider. Set to speak, giving Americans an update on the tragedy. Damage to the reactor poses substantial risk to people who are nearby. No, to every species on the planet, unfortunately. Obama says there's substantial risk. Let me be very clear, we don't expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the United States. But why wouldn't you? You don't have radiation detectors all over America pre-Fukushima because you don't think you can make it there. You have it there because you know radiation can make it there. There's a massive industry known as the Environmental Protection Agency's radiation departments they have mobile radiation detectors right across the country on top of that. You're talking about an army of people and equipment. They have planes that are specialists for going up and flying through the plumes. They did in Japan. And every institution modeled the entire planet covered in radiation in a short order. Now, because we got hindsight, the lies are really clear. And there should be an incentive for them not to do this again. Let me show you some of the plume models. This model is based on 20 days to your left. The model to your right is 21 days. This is a plutonium-239 dispersal model covering the whole planet. Right, but there was people out there trying to warn you. There was people out there trying to inform you. Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. And the xenon plume model was based on 20 days, for instance. It showed the whole planet covered. All the models on all the isotopes, and many different types of isotopes, all had this same attribute, right, where they assumed around 20 days to 30 days at most, the entire planet would be buried in nuclear waste. And then the studies quantifies those particular models. And this is, here we go. That's the xenon. This is a number of, and just in Washington, but this is symmetrically throughout North America, the Northern Hemisphere. It was 450 times above detection levels, persisted for weeks in Washington. These are insane numbers. This is stuff that we've never fantasized that a dirty bomb could produce, for instance. And that's all. Every time Japan fires up their incinerators, it's the equivalent of a dirty bomb. And these numbers we're talking about are filthy numbers. These are, everybody should have a bomb shelter in their property so they can hide into it for the next couple of dozen centuries. This industry has now started us on a extinction level event, and we have done a massive amount of research expeditions that are clearly showing this is an extinction event and that they all happen post-Fukushima. I still believe humanity will come to a senses and fight back. I don't want evil to conceive that it can win. cesium-137 plume forecast for North America and Europe up to March the 24th. This was the France's Institution for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety. This is the government. The plume forecast for North America at a million times normal after Fukushima cesium-137. And so they were showing 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137. And this particular model you're looking at there is only based on 7 days. This is the day before the story that we're reading right now, right? This is on the 18th. And by the way, cesium doesn't just give you cancer, it immediately damages the heart muscle. It's a gamma. It also saturates the thyroid gland, and that the iodate pills can't stop the cesium from aggregating. And cesium-137 is a issue. This is an issue. This is a bad boy, and it attacks everything with replicating cells. It's not just cancer. It's not just heart attacks. And the U.S. government model of Fukushima cesium-137 particles covering the northern hemisphere is this model. France's original model, and this is on March the 19th, the same day that the other media came out and said there was nothing. They said with the North America and Europe up to March the 24th from France's government. This model down here was Chernobyl, by the way. But it showed the whole planet covered in 31 days. And that particular model, I have that video right here, the video model, somewhere. I thought it was right there. And to some people, it might seem futile to come here for me to do this every night. I don't see it that way at all. I see it as educating everybody, and the fact that we are talking about it today means that this is important, that this is still a thing. And this is still a thing in thousands of years. This is still a nightmare for everything with replicating cells on this planet. So this is their model based on 31 days. This is 20 days in, right there. So the whole planet covered in 20 days of 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137. It pulses energy 600 feet every second. And the only way to compare this, think of a snowstorm. So look at this. This is like a snowstorm that starts in Japan. And it's coming out of Japan. It never stops coming out of Japan. By and by, you can't tell because all the planet within 30 days is covered. But the plume never stops. The snow never melts. The snow never goes away. And it never stops snowing. It does this for 1 billion years. Now, pretend it's not snow, call it radiation, but it's in the same capacity as you would expect in a snowstorm, where it's everywhere. Like, you can't be this much of a distance and there's not another cesium atom. And they pulse energy almost at the speed of light every second. And they pulse it up to 600 feet. And when it meets gammas, meets the neutrons, the betas, the alphas, they hit each other, and they have this special effect where almost at the speed of light, the gammas, the neutrons, the betas, the alphas, they don't mingle. They hit each other and they change direction. And almost at the speed of light each. And that's known as a braking effect. And it produces an X-ray. And the X-rays are nasty. So every species from here on after is getting full body X-rays. And this is why in most of the world you're not cleaning insects off your windshields anymore. because you sterilized them in increments over the last 13 years and they stopped reproducing. And eventually, the adults all died. Fukushima nuclear plume covered most of North America. High concentrations of radiation hit the US and Canada. Plume was rich in cesium-137. So there was a lot of evidence, a lot of different media, including American models from NOAA, to back up that particular model. Earlier today, the State Department told Americans to leave Japan. France done the same thing. Switzerland done the same to theirs. Canadians done the same to theirs. Earlier today, the State Department told Americans to leave Japan. Yeah, they told them to go to South America. Don't go back to America because that's where the plume was headed. Now the United States is also pulling out search and rescue teams and offering voluntarily evacuations for military families. 15:22 p.m. Eastern Time, just crossing the wire. Power to be reconnected to Fukushima Reactor 2, the International Atomic Energy Agency said. And the International Atomic Energy Agency, under no illusions, knew that Reactor 2, you were not connecting power to Reactor 2 on the 19th of March 2011. And so the International Atomic Energy Agency should be immediately disbanded. But because they're the actual UN military-industrial complex, this is what they do. Evil is what they do. That's all they know how to do. They have no redeeming qualities whatsoever. The U.S. military says 20,000 dependents in Japan are eligible for voluntary evacuation. 20,000 dependents in Japan are eligible for evacuation. High radiation found outside of Fukushima exclusion zone, March the 17th. March the 17th. Very grainy pictures, right? The Japanese military pumped jets of water from special fire trucks into a damaged reactor Thursday in a desperate bid to bring down temperatures as high radiation levels were reported outside the evacuation zones. No, the fire truck that was there, the reactors were already detonated. They had already melted down. There was nothing you can do. You're talking about 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, spraying water from a distance, because that was the best you could hope for, was symbiotic. It was meant to lull people into complacency because they don't understand how everything works, right? Japanese engineers were able to lay an external grid power line cable to nuclear reactor 2 at the crippled Fukushima complex, the International Atomic Energy Agency said Thursday. That's simply not true. And remember, this story is on Thursday, March the 17th. March the 17th. It's so preposterous. Again, Medusa, which is reactor 3, had detonated on the 16th. There were fuel rods and fuel assemblies, fuel cores all over the site, particularly right alongside of reactor 3 is reactor 2. And alongside of that is reactor 1. So there was no going near these sites. Even today, you're not going, 13 years later, you don't go near these sites. Authorities plan to reconnect power to the reactor once the military finishes spraying water in number 3 reactor building. So they talk about this as if it's just a normal fire instead of a nuclear meltdown site. And the people that wrote the story, the people, like obviously this is the International Atomic Energy Agency's footprint everywhere. And then the authors named that are on the story, they write stories about cats and everything else. And then when they have an accident, they get a chunk of money to put their name on these stories. They don't write these stories. You got to be incredibly astute in nuclear to write these types of stories. It's surreal that they hate us this much, that they hate the species. They hate Earth this much that they're willing to sacrifice Earth and the 8 million species for an industry that has always been falling apart anyway. These are the very worst examples of humans imaginable is what we've seen, particularly the pro-nuclear community. They turned into monsters. Taiwan actually had 2,000 or 2,200 nuclear scientists, nuclear academics, university students, ex-nuclear alumni from the institutions, nuclear power plant employees, etc., spam the internet, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and everything else, and challenge any assertions out there that this was an issue. And they were out there spamming. It was like a banana. It was like a potato chip. It was like walking in the sunshine. This is it doesn't seem like a crime if you don't understand the result of what they've done, the significance of what they've done. If you don't understand nuclear, it's hard to appreciate what kind of crime, what kind of hideous and heinous crime this actually is. And that this industry has always done the same routine. They have no fear of any repercussions, because there is no repercussions, because the industry has controlled all the checks and balances from the very get-go. And now we are in real trouble. This is as worse as it gets. We're watching a real life extinction event worldwide, and everything is post Fukushima. And the storm that we see coming now, Hurricane Milton, which is a once in a lifetime, so to speak, according to the crazies anyway, is a direct result. These supercell storms, these superstorms, super typhoons, super cyclones, super hurricanes, are we only see these post Fukushima, since Fukushima happened. All the 10,000 emaciated gray whales, 10,000 emaciated humpback whales, 10,000 emaciated beak whales. You found over 1,000, and when you find a whale, they assume 10 sank to the ocean floor that you didn't see. But they actually found 10,350 gray whales. They found them. There was an unusual mortality event, catastrophic numbers of the humpback whales, but now they acknowledge there's another 7,000 that are missing, and they're assumed to have starved to death like the rest of them, because the rest of them starved to death, same as the grain whales. It's the same thing with the beak whales. It's the same thing with the fin whales, same thing with the sperm whales. It's the same thing with the mink whales. It's the same thing with the killer whales. It's symmetrical with the seals and the sea lions and the dolphins. All the species, particularly what we call migratory species, are showing up at the end or close to their migratory destinations, which are typically 10,000 kilometers or more, emaciated. And these whales will go from 12 inches of blubber to 2 inches of blubber. And they have these peanut heads where the whole head is concave because there's no muscle and no blubber left. We've never seen anything like it pre-Fukushima. Everything is post-Fukushima. Millions and millions of birds showing up emaciated in the migratory runs, seabirds, and missing. 46 million missing from the east coast of the migratory birds hasn't showed up for the last 4 years, which means they're dead, they're gone. And the millions that we do find, we find different species of the spectrum of the food chain. We're finding species like the common murres that eats anchovies and squid and sardines and krill, like small species maybe this long. But at the same time, you're seeing the Cassini auklets are showing up, and they're the microscopic feeders. They're eating the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, the copepods. And so you got two different spectrums of the food chain, millions of birds in each instance showing up at the same time, emaciated. Not only in the Pacific, but also in the Atlantic. And then so when you put all this together, this clearly is an extinction event. This clearly supersedes everything else that's going on the planet. And the people that are in charge of it is the reason we can't have a future, because we won't deal with the issue. It's clearly on purpose that they're not going to deal with it. I mean, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags And now they're growing food in it because you stopped paying attention. Of radiation. Radioactive topsoil. 30 million. Imagine trying to sort out the keys to 30 million one-ton pickup trucks. That's your job. Right? The enormity of it is very difficult to describe. But 30 million one-ton pickup trucks bumper to bumper is 5 rows of traffic bumper to bumper around the planet. With a 1-ton bag, 2,200 pounds in the back of each 1-ton truck. Japanese Science Ministry said exposure to levels detected for a period of 6 hours would be the equivalent of a maximum safe level a person could absorb in a year. Like the level you absorb in a year naturally has nothing to do with the anthropogenic man-made radiation. Right? Because they've conflated natural, harmless, stupid, everyday background with anthropogenic man-made radiation. So when you get anthropogenic isotopes, atoms in your body, it sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. It attacks it because it's a foreign object. It doesn't have an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And so it just attacks it relentlessly every second of your life. And so this radiation's in your body, a single atom. You can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. But the single atom in your body is pulsing energy in every direction almost at the speed of light, wrecking chromosomes and DNA in cells. Your body tries to repair that every second. It can't do that. And then at the same time, your body attacks the source and tries to build a tumor around it, which eventually it will if you live long enough. But if you get enough of them in, you compromise your immune system. And so now you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally completely harmless. And so when the science minister says the exposures are the equivalent of a whole year, that's completely out of context of what's really happening here. It's completely dishonest. And if the Japanese Science Ministry is the one that's saying that, then you're in a lot of trouble because you can't trust them ever again, not even for 1 second. And that's what they've done to you. Singapore's government advised its citizens to evacuate areas which are within 100 kilometers of the disease factory. Well, they should have advised them to get the hell out of the country. And the International Atomic Energy Agency chief, who thank goodness is dead, departed for Japan, where he said he hoped to visit the plant with a team of experts, which, let's be clear, they, under no circumstances are they going to the nuclear meltdown. There's zero possibility that these people that lied to you in every facet of the story and every second of each day and continue to lie today are going to go to the nuclear meltdown. It's zero possibility. Fukushima nuclear plant workers on a suicide mission. You really think nuclear scientists are going near that bad boy? You got any idea what kind of coward these people actually are? That's what I really find interesting, is how cowardly the nuclear scientists really are. TEPCO said it was concerned about overheating at the number 3 reactor cooling pool. Well, that's number 3. That's what it looked like on day 6. Remember, it was a 190-foot, 19-story, 65-meter building. So a 2-story house is about 20 feet. So if you took a 2-story house and 9 more stacked on top of it, that's how high we're talking about. There's nothing left of this building. And this was a plutonium mixed oxide fuel. This is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. No one's going to number 3. All the reactors contain plutonium because that's how the reactors work. Once you start the chain reaction, you're producing the plutonium. And you need that in order to have that chain reaction continue, which is particularly harmful to humans if released into the environment. Of course, they knew this on that date, which is March the 19th. No, March the 17th on this story, right? Is it March the 17th? Bear with me. Yeah, March the 17th. So March the 17th, that's reactor 3 behind me. And this is what was left, just a stump. So you really got to be just the worst human imaginable to participate in this cover-up and this lie. You got to be the most criminally insane person or the most vicious human imaginable to come out and lie to everybody and then make fun of anybody that had any concerns, to ridicule them because they were concerned, but which was appropriate. And overheating has caused 4 hydrogen explosions, 2 fires at the plant, as well as a partial meltdown of number 1, number 2, number 3 reactors of the 6-reactor facility. 4 hydrogen explosions, 2 fires, as well as partial meltdown of 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3. They refuse to acknowledge reactor 4 melted down. Even today, I'm going to show you reactor 4 in 2013. Here's what reactor 4 to your left. So the reactor core and the fuel pools, which are 8 reactor cores, 4 in each one, at the top of the 190-foot building, are completely gone. The stump of the building, there's nothing left. It's just, you can't even really call it rubble. It's, anyway, they describe it as a stump. And they left the stump there. They ran through thousands and thousands of homeless, destroyed them and murdered them. And then they put a cover over it and pretend they were in the building getting fuel at the pool. It's such a nightmarish. These people by nature are cowards. On top of that, that's one of the most frightening things about these people. So when you look at reactor 3 and 4, you're talking about, because each reactor core was probably 100 Chernobyl, because they were pure uranium, pure plutonium. Chernobyl was graphite. These were massive reactor cores. And so the inventories of each reactor core, and there was 9 reactor cores at least in each building. It's like 1,800 Chernobyls melting down at the one time. Just those 2 buildings. There's 4 of these buildings that has that particular attribute. This is why we're seeing an extinction event and weather catastrophic events like the Hurricane Milton. Which, to tell you the truth, I am frightened to death for everybody in the way of this nightmare that's coming in there. And we've seen what the media just done with Hurricane Helena, and we've seen the damage, the nightmarish damage covered up. Thank goodness for social media that we're able to see the true horror. Imagine what this creature is going to do. It's coming to shore at least 200 miles per hour. It's going to be gusting over 300 miles per hour. It's going to be gusting close to 500 kilometers per hour if it stays on the same track. And it's over 180 miles per hour right now. It's probably going to be 700 feet wide, 700 miles wide. But it's going to go across a very, very, very heated section of the ocean before it gets to the coastline, to the Florida Peninsula, which has multiple reactors on it. I mean, and then at the same time as that comes to shore, is Israel going to attack Iran? Because that's a big concern too, isn't it? Because Iran's not going to take it no more. And Iran has already demonstrated they can hit whatever target they want to in Israel. And Israel can't do nothing about it. Iran says they'll hit their nuclear back. They're going to hit their 2 small ports back. Israel only got 2 ports. If that gets taken out, they're in real trouble. They're already on the brink of bankruptcy. And the military-industrial complex in the U.S. just announced they're going to give them $8 billion. $8 billion. They got nothing for the victims in Helena, from Hurricane Helena, rather. A United Nations forecast cited by the New York Times revealed a radiation plume spreading from the stricken reactors that could hit Southern California by that Friday. However, there's expected to be little health risk. There was 20,000 people in a single study that died of heart attacks, a spike in heart attacks in the United States, right? There was a massive increase in infant mortality in the couple of weeks following Fukushima, for instance, in another study. And then the numbers in the radioactive fallout of the plumes was really something. Japan instructed local authorities Thursday to start screening food for radioactivity, the first time it has set radiation limits on domestically produced food. Clearly that should have been done immediately. They didn't want to admit there was a nuclear meltdown, so they didn't. And by proxy, then they got 865,000 extra cancers in the first year, and not everybody gets cancer. There's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. I love these time machine stories because it's outrageous documentation of the betrayal and attempted mass murder and genocide of everybody in the United States. And the New York Post, we're going to have to leave that for another night. That's what we're going to get out of me tonight. When it come time to do the show tonight, I was so burnt out. I was like, I don't know if I could do a show. But once I start doing the show and start talking about this subject and showing the new documentation, because we never covered any of these stories, right? I become just energized in many ways, right? I'm not going to push myself tonight, though. And put a link there for James. I think he's got 8 new songs in the last couple of days posted. I listened to every one of them. And you'll find it in the description, top of the description. I'll try to remember to put it in the top of the comments, I'll have to try to put it in the description or in the chat or in the comment section because my chat room doesn't show up for 12 hours. My videos will get longer at exactly 12 hours. And the list goes on. By the way, James donated $200 last night. Thank goodness somebody had done that. Like, it's so difficult to keep this operation alive. It's so difficult. I'm just heartbroken that I have to struggle so much because it's hard to comprehend how effective I can be if I was given the opportunity. And does anybody really think I don't have the go in me to go after this industry? I don't think there's anybody on the planet that hates this industry more than I actually do. I'm sure there is, but I find it hard to believe anybody can hate this industry as much as I do. I really do. And I hate them for all the right reasons. I hate them for all the lies we've covered nonstop for over a decade. We've been doing the show for over a decade. If you make it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. We're going to pick up tomorrow night at this story right here. These are crazy stories. Fukushima nuclear plant workers walking into certain death by radiation. That's a great story. That's a great headline, isn't it? We'll start there tomorrow night. Let's close the poll up. Should journalists and academics who lied about Fukushima nuclear meltdowns lose their degrees? Clearly. Well, why shouldn't they, right? People have the opportunity to call into these shows and explain why they don't think they should. It's the pro-nuclear community that does that. Because they're ashamed of themselves, and that's why they vote no. But, I mean, when you look at, if you start going back through every single one of my videos and take a screen capture of the poll at the end of the show, or at the beginning of the show, whatever. You take a screen capture, because it'll be in the video, right, of the poll. And what, we got 800 videos on this site? So let's say there's 700. You got 700 polls. Do you got any idea what kind of education you're talking about in just polls? And then the question is, why do you have a poll like that? is the industry so bad that you needed a poll to articulate that? Yes. And that was the point of the poll, was to show you this fundamental flaw that the world seems to be missing. That journalists and academics who lied about Fukushima clearly should lose their degrees, and that everybody in the nuclear industry, or everybody in journalists that wrote a story, or put their name on a story that was written by the industry, no doubt, should lose their degree for doing it. And that if I was in a position to challenge these people, make no mistake about it, I would litigate these people. Take great pride in doing it. And we'll close the poll down. We'll call it a night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We listened to that. I'm going to play a song that I've been playing for quite a while of James Lewis. That I actually listen to that song 3 times a day in the car. Believe it or not, in a row. Some things just work, right? And so the song I'm going to play for you is a James Lewis song about Calm Down Charlie. He's a stalker that stalked us for 10 years. I've been doing this for over 10 years, by the way. I've been doing it for 22 years, but for the last 10 years, this stalker has been stalking us. He finally ran away. And the turning point was when James came out with this song. He called into the show and lost his mind. He was vicious. I got to play that video again, actually, that clips from that particular day. Because it was pretty funny, right? You know me, I aggregate everything. So calm down, Charlie. I'm not going to interfere because the song starts off with a good kick. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We'll come back, do some serious curb stomping. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. Thanks for participating in the poll. Please consider donating. There's 2 links in the description directly to me. You can't make a mistake. And it's never been an issue. So I do hope one of these days people realize how difficult it is to keep this operation moving forward and how important those contributions actually are. I've ran the whole operation directly straight into the ground because we can't keep it up running any other way. But we are still going strong. I can guarantee you there is no slowing down in my future. Have a great night. See everybody tomorrow night. Take care, folks.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford's show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd may shout and roar, Charlie's unfazed, he's heard it all before. His swinging rationale, like a soothing song, says, hold on to logic, we gotta stay strong. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show.